Before you close your eyes tonight, imagine stepping into a world where the largest empire on Earth believed it needed almost nothing from the outside world. Picture endless rice fields glowing beneath the morning sun, crowded cities filled with merchants, and grand palaces hidden behind crimson walls. Everything seems calm. Everything feels permanent. But beneath that peaceful surface, something small is already beginning to change history forever. Tonight, we are not rushing through battles or loud victories. Instead, we will slowly walk through the final peaceful years of Qing China, long before the smoke of war drifted across its rivers. As always, settle into a comfortable position, take a slow breath, and allow this journey to unfold one quiet step at a time. Our story begins in the early 19th century. Across Europe, factories roared with new machines, while powerful ships crossed distant oceans searching for trade. Yet thousands of miles away, the Qing Empire stood with remarkable confidence. It ruled over hundreds of millions of people, making it one of the wealthiest and most influential civilizations on Earth. To many Chinese officials, foreign kingdoms appeared small, distant, and largely unimportant. The empire produced silk admired across continents, delicate porcelain treasured by kings, and tea that had become an everyday habit in Britain. Silver flowed into China from every direction, enriching merchants and strengthening the imperial economy. Life for ordinary villagers followed familiar rhythms. Farmers woke before sunrise, worked the fertile fields, shared simple meals with their families, and rested as darkness settled across the countryside. In the great cities, scholars prepared for difficult imperial examinations, believing education offered the highest path to honor and service. The emperor, surrounded by ministers and ancient traditions, believed the empire remained secure. Few imagined that an invisible threat would arrive not with armies, but with cargo ships carrying a product that seemed harmless at first glance. Far beyond China's coastline, British merchants faced a growing problem. They desperately wanted more Chinese tea, yet China wanted very few British goods in return. Year after year, enormous amounts of silver left Britain, creating frustration among traders and government officials alike. They searched for a solution. They believed they had found one. And it would quietly reshape the future of one of history's. The empire appeared peaceful from the outside, but its strength depended on something that could not easily be seen. Every province sent taxes to Beijing. Every official was expected to remain loyal to the emperor. Every harvest mattered because millions of families relied on the land for survival. A single year of floods or drought could change countless lives, yet the Qing government had ruled for so long that many believed it could overcome almost any challenge. Across the countryside, children learned the same stories their grandparents had heard. Respect for parents, loyalty to the emperor, and harmony within society formed the foundation of everyday life. Villages celebrated seasonal festivals, burned incense at ancient temples, and prayed for healthy crops. Most people would never travel farther than the nearest market town, and many had little interest in the distant world beyond China's borders. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, British merchants gathered in busy ports, studying ledgers filled with worrying numbers. Ship after ship returned from China carrying valuable tea, silk, and porcelain, but almost every purchase required payment in silver. The flow of precious metal continued in only one direction, and Britain's financial leaders grew increasingly concerned. Inside crowded meeting rooms, traders searched for another product that China might finally agree to buy. Wool had failed. Manufactured goods had failed. Even expensive gifts rarely impressed Qing officials. China already believed it possessed everything necessary for a prosperous civilization. The problem became impossible to ignore. If Britain could not sell enough goods to China, the trade imbalance would continue draining enormous amounts of silver every year. Some merchants proposed new negotiations. Others demanded stronger political pressure. But a small number of businessmen quietly suggested something very different. They already knew of a product grown in British-controlled India. It was compact, valuable, easy to transport, and capable of creating customers who would return again and again. At first, only small shipments were discussed. No one could yet imagine that these ordinary-looking wooden chests would begin a chain of events that would slowly weaken the greatest empire in Asia. No one could yet imagine that these ordinary-looking wooden chests would begin a chain of events that would slowly weaken the greatest empire in Asia. Those wooden chests did not contain gold, silver, or rare spices. Instead, they held carefully packed opium, a drug made from the poppy flower. For centuries, opium had been used in small amounts as a medicine in different parts of the world. Doctors sometimes gave it to reduce pain or help patients sleep. But when smoked regularly, it could become dangerously addictive. British merchants understood one simple truth. If enough people in China began buying opium, silver would no longer flow only toward Chinese merchants. Instead, the silver would begin returning to British trading companies. What had once been a financial problem could become an enormous business opportunity. Officially, the Qing government had already restricted the opium trade. Importing large amounts of the drug was illegal. Imperial officials knew that addiction could weaken workers, soldiers, and government employees alike. Yet laws written on paper were much easier to enforce than thousands of miles of coastline. Along China's southern coast, hundreds of small boats traveled between islands, fishing villages, and busy ports every day. Most carried ordinary cargo such as rice, salt, or timber. Hidden among them, however, were smugglers willing to risk everything for profit. Merchant ships rarely unloaded opium directly at official harbors. Instead, they anchored offshore beyond the immediate reach of government inspectors. Under the cover of darkness, smaller Chinese boats quietly approached, loaded the wooden chests, and disappeared before sunrise. By morning, the evidence had already vanished into warehouses, hidden rooms, and secret trading networks. Many local officials suspected what was happening. Some tried to stop it. Others accepted generous bribes and looked the other way. A few convinced themselves the trade was too small to matter. They were wrong. With each passing month, a few more chests entered China. Then a few hundred more. Soon, the number would become impossible to count. And while most ordinary families continued living peaceful lives, believing nothing had changed, an invisible current had already begun flowing beneath the surface of the empire, carrying with it a danger that would soon reach every corner of Qing China. At first, the changes were almost impossible to notice. A wealthy merchant here, a government clerk there, perhaps a sailor returning from the southern ports. They gathered quietly in hidden rooms where oil lamps burned low and the smell of sweet smoke drifted through the air. Many believed they could stop whenever they wished. Few realized how quickly dependence could take hold. An evening of curiosity became a weekly habit. A weekly habit became a daily need. Before long, the drug was no longer a luxury reserved for the wealthy. It spread through trading towns, river ports, and growing cities. Every successful sale encouraged smugglers to bring even more shipments across the sea. The profits were astonishing. A single cargo of opium could earn far more than many legal goods transported over the same distance. British trading companies watched the numbers with satisfaction. The silver that had flowed steadily into China for decades was beginning to reverse direction. Instead of paying only for tea and silk, Chinese buyers were now spending enormous amounts of silver to purchase opium. The balance of trade slowly shifted. Most people inside the Qing court did not immediately understand the scale of what was happening. Reports arrived from distant provinces, but each described only a small problem. One official mentioned rising addiction among local merchants. Another reported increased smuggling along the coast. A third warned that government soldiers had been caught using the drug while on duty. Viewed separately, these reports seemed manageable. Together, they revealed something far more serious. In the crowded markets of Canton, whispers spread between traders who knew where the secret warehouses were hidden. Small boats continued their silent journeys after sunset, moving from foreign ships anchored offshore to isolated coves where waiting buyers unloaded heavy wooden chests without attracting attention. Every successful delivery strengthened the underground trade. Every shipment weakened the emperor's control. Yet life across most of the empire still appeared peaceful. Farmers harvested rice beneath clear skies. Scholars prepared for examinations. Families celebrated weddings, festivals, and birthdays, unaware that a growing addiction was quietly draining silver from the economy and slowly eroding the foundations of one of history's greatest empires. The real crisis had not yet begun. But it was moving closer with every tide that carried another ship toward China's southern coast. The city of Canton, known today as Guangzhou, had become the center of China's foreign trade. It was one of the few places where Western merchants were officially allowed to conduct business. Every trading season, tall sailing ships from Britain and other European nations anchored offshore, their wooden hulls packed with cargo from distant lands. During the day, business appeared orderly and legal. Contracts were signed, tea was weighed, and silver changed hands. But when darkness settled over the Pearl River, an entirely different trade quietly came to life. Small lanterns flickered across the water as narrow Chinese boats slipped silently through the night. Their crews avoided customs officers and government patrols, steering toward foreign ships waiting beyond the harbor. Their heavy wooden chests were carefully lowered into the waiting boats. No loud voices. No unnecessary lights. Every man understood that silence meant survival. Before sunrise, the boats returned to hidden warehouses scattered along the coast. From those secret storage buildings, the opium began another journey. Some cargo traveled by river, hidden beneath ordinary goods. Some moved on the backs of horses and mules along mountain roads. Other shipments disappeared into busy market towns where trusted dealers waited patiently for new supplies. The network expanded with remarkable speed. Each successful delivery created new customers. Each new customer increased the demand. And each increase in demand encouraged smugglers to bring even larger shipments into China. Money flowed through this hidden system faster than anyone inside the imperial court realized. Smugglers became wealthy. Corrupt officials accepted larger bribes. Honest officers found themselves outnumbered, while ordinary citizens remained unaware that an illegal trade was quietly growing beneath the surface of everyday life. Far away in Beijing, the emperor still believed the empire remained strong and stable. He could not yet see that every secret shipment arriving under the cover of darkness carried more than a dangerous drug. It carried the beginning of a crisis that would soon test the strength, confidence, and future of the Qing Empire in ways no one could have imagined. It carried the beginning of a crisis that would soon test the strength, confidence, and future of the Qing Empire in ways no one could have imagined. As the months turned into years, the effects of the opium trade became harder to hide. In some towns, shopkeepers noticed familiar customers visiting less often because much of their money now disappeared into the hands of opium dealers. Farmers who had once worked from sunrise until sunset began missing days in the fields. Boatmen arrived late at the docks, and skilled craftsmen struggled to finish the work that had once made them respected throughout their communities. At first, these changes seemed unrelated. One village blamed poor harvests. Another blamed illness. Others believed simple bad luck was responsible. Very few people realized that the same hidden force connected these growing problems across hundreds of miles. Inside dimly lit smoking rooms, men sat quietly on wooden beds, holding long pipes as pale smoke curled toward the ceiling. The atmosphere seemed calm, almost peaceful, Yet many who entered believing they were only seeking a moment of relaxation soon discovered they wanted to return again and again. What began as curiosity slowly became dependence. Families suffered in silence. Savings disappeared. Businesses declined. Children watched their parents struggle to explain why money that once bought food and clothing had suddenly become scarce. The silver leaving China increased every season. For generations, merchants from around the world had carried silver into the empire to purchase its famous goods. Now the flow had begun to reverse. Ship after ship departed Chinese waters carrying not only tea and silk, but also the silver earned from selling opium. Some local governors finally recognized the danger and sent urgent reports to Beijing. Their letters described rising addiction, expanding smuggling networks, and growing corruption among officials responsible for enforcing the law. Each report sounded more serious than the last. Within the Forbidden City, senior ministers gathered to discuss the alarming news. Some argued for stronger laws. Others demanded harsher punishments. A few warned that unless immediate action was taken, the empire's economy, military, and government could all face consequences far greater than anyone had imagined. The emperor listened carefully. Soon, he would choose a man whose determination would challenge the entire illegal trade, and unknowingly place China. Both sides quietly understood that a direct confrontation was becoming almost impossible to avoid. Commissioner Lin knew that searching warehouses alone would never end the crisis. The real source of the problem remained anchored beyond the shoreline, where foreign merchant ships continued waiting with their valuable cargo. As long as fresh supplies reached Chinese smugglers, the illegal trade would simply begin again. So Lin made a bold decision. He ordered every Chinese dealer connected to the opium business to surrender immediately. Those who confessed and handed over their remaining supplies would receive a lighter punishment. Those who refused would face the full power of imperial law. The announcement spread through Canton within hours. Markets buzzed with anxious whispers. Shopkeepers closed early to discuss the news. Boat captains delayed their journeys, uncertain whether the river would soon be filled with imperial patrols. Even honest merchants worried that ordinary trade might come to a halt. Foreign traders watched from their factories near. Between them stood a city holding its breath, unaware that history was about to change forever. Commissioner Lin refused to wait any longer. He demanded that every foreign merchant in Canton surrender all remaining opium under their control. No exceptions would be made. The order shocked the international trading community. For years, merchants had relied on negotiations, delays, and political influence whenever disagreements arose. This time, none of those methods worked. Days passed in growing uncertainty. Foreign warehouses were placed under strict supervision. Supplies of food and fresh water became limited as pressure mounted. Merchants gathered each evening, debating what should be done. Some argued that surrendering the opium would protect future trade. Others insisted that giving in would encourage the Qing government to make even greater demands. The British superintendent, Charles Elliot, faced an impossible decision. Responsible for protecting British citizens, he understood that refusing the emperor's order could place every merchant in immediate danger. After long discussions, he made a choice that surprised many. He instructed British merchants to hand over their entire stock of opium to the Chinese authorities. One by one, the wooden chests were delivered. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Workers struggled day and night to move the heavy cargo from ships and warehouses to guarded storage areas under Commissioner Lin's control. It became one of the largest drug seizures the world had ever seen. Chinese officials carefully counted every chest. Every seal was inspected. Every shipment was recorded. The value of the confiscated opium was enormous, representing years of profitable trade. For the Qing government, However, its financial worth meant nothing compared to the damage it had already caused. Lin believed the poison had to disappear forever. As the final inventory was completed, crowds gathered at a distance, wondering what would happen next. No one expected the commissioner to return the cargo. No one expected compensation. Instead, Lin prepared to destroy every last chest in full public view. Across the harbor, British merchants watched in silence. Many already feared that once the smoke cleared, diplomacy would give way to something far more dangerous, and the path toward open war would become almost impossible to avoid. Many already feared that once the smoke cleared, diplomacy would give way to something far more dangerous, and the path toward open war would become almost impossible to avoid. Under Commissioner Lin's orders, thousands of confiscated opium chests were transported to a specially prepared site near Human, not far from Canton. Soldiers guarded the area day and night. Officials checked inventories repeatedly to ensure nothing disappeared before the destruction began. News of the operation spread quickly. Farmers traveling to nearby markets spoke about it. Merchants carried the story to distant cities. Government messengers reported every development back to Beijing. People understood that they were witnessing an event unlike anything seen before in Qing China. When the day finally arrived, large crowds gathered at a safe distance. They watched as workers opened the wooden chests and emptied their contents into enormous trenches. The dark opium was mixed with lime and salt water, creating a chemical reaction that made the drug unusable. The process continued hour after hour under the watchful eyes of imperial officials. Commissioner Lin wanted the destruction to be complete. No cargo would be secretly sold. No shipment would be hidden away. No merchant would be allowed to recover even a small portion of the confiscated stock. For weeks, the operation continued. More workers arrived. More trenches were prepared. More opium disappeared forever. By the time the work ended, over 20,000 chests had been destroyed. It was a powerful message from the Qing Empire. The emperor's government had shown that it was willing to act decisively against a trade it considered harmful to its people. Many Chinese citizens celebrated the event. They believed the crisis had finally been solved. They hoped addiction would decline and that the illegal trade would collapse. But beyond China's shores, the reaction was very different. British merchants were furious. Investors demanded compensation. Political leaders received reports describing massive financial losses. Some argued that British property had been destroyed without payment. Others claimed that national honor itself had been challenged. As arguments spread through offices, ports, and government buildings thousands of miles away, support began growing for a response that would extend far beyond diplomacy. The destruction of the opium had ended one chapter of the crisis, and across the oceans, powerful forces were already beginning to move toward a confrontation that neither side could fully control. The news traveled from Canton to London aboard fast merchant vessels, crossing thousands of miles of open sea before reaching government officials and influential business leaders. By the time the reports arrived, the story had grown even more dramatic. Newspapers described the destruction of an enormous quantity of British-owned opium, while merchants demanded that the government protect both their property and Britain's commercial interests in Asia. Inside Parliament, the debate quickly became intense. Some members argued that China had every right to enforce its own laws within its borders. Others insisted that Britain could not allow such a costly loss to go unanswered. Powerful trading companies warned that if no action were taken, Britain's influence in global commerce would suffer and future trade with China might become impossible. The British government faced. Across the sea, the first British warships began their long voyage toward China, carrying with them not only soldiers and cannons, but the beginning of a conflict that would permanently change the relationship between China and the Western world. Months later, dark silhouettes appeared on the horizon along China's southern coast. At first, Fishermen believed they were ordinary merchant vessels. But as the ships drew closer, their towering masts, rows of heavy cannons, and disciplined formations revealed a very different purpose. Britain had not come simply to negotiate. It had arrived with a powerful naval force prepared to support its demands. The Qing government had expected tension. It had not expected a fleet like this. Chinese commanders quickly organized coastal defenses. Soldiers were stationed inside aging forts overlooking the rivers, while large wooden war junks prepared to protect nearby ports. Many officers believed courage and numbers would be enough to defend the empire, just as they had against earlier threats. Few fully understood how much naval warfare had changed during the Industrial Revolution. The British fleet carried modern weapons capable of firing farther, faster, and with greater accuracy than most Chinese coastal batteries. Steam-powered vessels could continue moving even when the wind disappeared, giving them an advantage that surprised many Qing commanders during the first encounters. Villagers living near the coast watched anxiously as smoke rose from distant ships. Trade slowed almost immediately. Fishing boats remained close to shore, and merchants delayed valuable shipments, uncertain whether the sea would soon become a battlefield. Inside Beijing, urgent reports reached the emperor one after another. Foreign warships had entered Chinese waters. Coastal defenses were under pressure. Negotiations were failing. The crisis that had begun with secret shipments of opium had now become an international military confrontation. Neither side was willing to retreat. And as the first cannon echoed across the water, the long period of uneasy diplomacy finally came to an end, marking the opening moments of what history would remember as the First Opium War. Marking the opening moments of what history would remember as the First Opium War. The first clashes were brief, but they revealed a painful reality. British warships stayed beyond the effective range of many Chinese coastal cannons, firing powerful broadsides that shattered wooden defenses from a distance. Thick clouds of smoke rolled across the water as cannonballs crashed into forts that had protected the coastline for generations. Chinese soldiers fought with determination. Many had never faced an enemy equipped with such advanced naval technology. Their courage was undeniable, yet bravery alone could not overcome the growing gap in weapons, training, and military tactics. Several coastal batteries were silenced within hours, while British ships continued advancing with remarkable discipline. News of each defeat spread rapidly through the empire. Messengers rode day and night toward Beijing carrying reports from local commanders. Some described damaged forts. Others warned that important ports could no longer be defended. The emperor listened as ministers argued over the best response. Some urged immediate peace negotiations, while others believed surrendering to foreign demands would bring lasting humiliation to the Qing Empire. Meanwhile, ordinary people paid. It would reshape the destiny of an empire that had once believed it stood beyond the reach of foreign influence. As the war continued, British forces advanced farther along China's coastline, capturing strategic ports one after another. Their commanders understood that controlling major harbors would disrupt trade, weaken the Qing government, and increase pressure on the emperor to accept British demands. Each successful landing demonstrated the effectiveness of modern naval power against an empire that had relied on older military traditions for centuries. Chinese commanders continued organizing resistance wherever they could. New troops arrived from inland provinces, ancient city walls were reinforced, and cannons were placed along important rivers. In many places, soldiers fought with remarkable determination despite knowing that their weapons often lacked the range and accuracy of British artillery. The battles became a test of endurance. Smoke drifted above coastal cities. Merchant ships remained trapped inside harbors. Trade routes that had once carried silk, tea, and porcelain across the world suddenly fell silent. For ordinary families, the war brought uncertainty rather than glory. Prices rose in local markets as supplies became difficult to transport. Fishermen feared leaving the shore. Shopkeepers closed their businesses early, worried that fighting might spread to their towns. Rumors traveled faster than official news, leaving people unsure what to believe. The real question had become what price China would be forced to pay before the guns finally fell silent. By the summer of 1842, the answer was becoming painfully clear. British forces had secured several key positions along China's coast and pushed deeper into the country's vital waterways. Their ships sailed up the Yangtze River, threatening major cities and disrupting one of the empire's most important trade routes. Every mile they advanced increased the pressure on the Qing government. Inside Beijing, the emperor's advisors reached a difficult conclusion. The war could no longer be won by force alone. Continuing the fighting would likely bring even greater destruction, more economic hardship, and the possible loss of additional cities. Reluctantly, imperial officials agreed that negotiations had become unavoidable. Representatives from both nations met aboard a British warship anchored near the city of Nanjing. The atmosphere was formal, quiet, and tense. Every sentence spoken during those meetings would influence the future of China for generations to come. After days of discussion, an agreement was finally reached. History would remember it as the Treaty of Nanjing . Under its terms, China agreed to pay a large financial indemnity to Britain, open several important ports to British trade, and grant British merchants greater commercial access than ever before. Perhaps the most significant condition of all was the transfer of Hong Kong Island to British control. For many officials within the Qing Empire, the treaty felt deeply humiliating. It was the first major agreement signed after a military defeat by a Western power, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in Chinese history. When news of the treaty spread across the empire, reactions were mixed. Some people felt relieved that the fighting had finally ended. Others feared that the concessions made at Nanjing would encourage more foreign nations to demand similar privileges. The cannons had fallen silent. But the consequences of the war were only beginning. The Treaty of Nanjing ended the First Opium War, yet it also opened a door that would prove impossible to close, changing China's relationship with the outside world for decades to come. Although peace had officially returned, life across the Qing Empire did not suddenly become normal again. The scars of the war remain visible in damaged ports, abandoned forts, and communities that had lost fathers, sons, and brothers during the fighting. Merchants slowly reopened their shops, fishermen returned to the rivers, and farmers planted new crops, but a quiet sense of uncertainty lingered everywhere. The newly opened treaty ports soon became places unlike any China had seen before. British merchants arrived with larger ships, new goods, and greater confidence. Warehouses expanded along the waterfront, foreign businesses established permanent offices, and unfamiliar languages echoed through streets that had once been filled almost entirely with Chinese traders. For some local merchants, these changes created new opportunities. Trade increased. New products entered the markets. Some families earned fortunes by working with foreign companies. But others struggled to compete as the old trading system that had protected Chinese commerce for generations began to disappear. Meanwhile, Hong Kong entered a new chapter under British administration. What had once been a relatively quiet island gradually transformed into a growing commercial center where ships from around the world gathered. Few people at the time could have imagined that it would eventually become one of the world's busiest international ports. Inside the imperial court, many officials realized that the empire faced problems extending far beyond the opium trade itself. The war had exposed weaknesses in the military, the government, and the economy. Some ministers called for modernization, improved weapons, and stronger coastal defenses. Others insisted that preserving traditional institutions remained the safest path forward. The debate continued for years. Yet while leaders argued over the future, foreign nations carefully watched China's situation. They had seen that the Qing Empire could be pressured into signing unequal agreements, and some governments quietly wondered whether they too might secure similar privileges. The First Opium War had ended. But the era of foreign influence over China was only beginning. Beyond the horizon, new challenges were already gathering, and before many years had passed, another conflict would push the Qing Empire into an even deeper crisis. Another conflict would push the Qing Empire into an even deeper crisis. In the years that followed, many Chinese officials hoped the painful lessons of the First Opium War would strengthen the empire. Instead, new problems emerged almost everywhere. Corruption spread through local governments, tax collection became increasingly difficult, and confidence in the Qing administration slowly began to weaken. The victory Britain had achieved on the battlefield had also changed how other foreign powers viewed China. France watched closely. The United States negotiated its own agreements. Other European nations soon demanded many of the same trading privileges that Britain had secured. One treaty after another reduced China's control over its own commerce, making it harder for the imperial government to protect domestic industries and regulate foreign merchants. At the same time, the opium trade did not disappear. Despite Commissioner Lin's determined efforts years earlier, smugglers found new routes and new business partners. Addiction continued affecting families across the empire, draining wealth from local communities and placing additional pressure on an already struggling economy. Inside Beijing, reform-minded officials warned that China needed modern shipyards, stronger weapons, updated military training, and better communication between distant provinces. Some younger scholars agreed, believing the empire had to learn from the rapidly changing world beyond its borders. Others strongly disagreed. They argued that China's traditions had guided the empire successfully for centuries and that copying foreign methods would only weaken its cultural identity. The disagreement created deep divisions inside the government, making meaningful reform painfully slow. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens simply hoped for stability. Farmers prayed for good harvests. Shopkeepers worried about rising prices. Parents wanted their children to grow up in peace rather than witness another devastating war. Yet across the oceans, international tensions continued to build. Diplomatic disputes, trade disagreements, and conflicting ambitions steadily pushed China, opening the door to the Second Opium War. More than a decade passed after the Treaty of Nanjing, yet the relationship between China and Britain remained tense. British officials argued that the existing treaty did not grant enough commercial freedom, while Qing authorities believed foreign merchants were already receiving far more privileges than should have been allowed. Small disagreements at the ports gradually turned into larger diplomatic disputes. Then, in 1856, a single incident changed everything. Chinese officials boarded a small vessel known as the *Arrow*, suspecting its crew of piracy and smuggling. Although the ship had once been registered in Hong Kong, Chinese authorities believed they had every legal right to inspect it. British representatives strongly disagreed, claiming that the boarding violated British rights and international agreements. The dispute quickly escalated. Diplomatic protests became military preparations. Warships once again gathered along China's southern coast. This time, Britain was not alone. France joined the conflict after the killing of a French missionary in China, arguing that its own citizens and interests also required protection. Together, the two nations assembled a powerful military force far stronger than the one that had fought during the First Opium War. Chinese commanders prepared their defenses once more, but the empire remained weakened by internal unrest and years of political instability. Resources were stretched thin, and many soldiers lacked modern equipment capable of matching the advancing European armies. As fighting resumed, British and French forces captured several important coastal positions before pushing deeper toward northern China. The Qing government attempted negotiations, but each failed agreement only delayed the next military campaign. Ordinary people once again suffered the greatest hardships. Families fled from advancing armies. Markets closed, setting the stage for even greater challenges in the decades that followed. As the years passed, the Opium Wars became more than a series of battles recorded in history books. They transformed the direction of an ancient civilization. The Qing Empire remained on the map, but its authority had been permanently weakened. Foreign influence expanded into ports, cities, and markets, while new treaties continued to reshape China's relationship with the outside world. For ordinary people, life slowly moved forward. Children returned to school. Farmers planted new harvests. Boats once again crossed the rivers carrying tea, rice, silk, and porcelain. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm of daily life, the memory of the wars never truly disappeared. Families remembered loved ones who never returned. Merchants remembered businesses that had been lost. Officials remembered how quickly an empire that seemed invincible had discovered its own weaknesses. In the decades that followed, many Chinese scholars, soldiers, and reformers asked the same difficult question. How could their nation become strong enough to prevent such humiliation from happening again? Some believed the answer was modern education. Others argued for industrial technology, stronger navies, and modern armies. Many insisted that China must learn from the outside world while still preserving its own ancient traditions. Those debates would eventually shape the country's future and influence generations yet to come. Looking back today, the story of the Opium Wars is not simply about opium or trade. It is a reminder that economic decisions can change the course of history, that governments ignoring growing problems often face greater crises later, and that even the most powerful empires cannot remain unchanged forever. Our quiet journey through this chapter of history now comes to an end. The rivers continue flowing. The sea remains calm. The smoke of war has faded into memory. And somewhere beyond the pages of history, the echoes of those remarkable years still remind us how quickly the world can change when ambition, commerce, and power collide. Thank you for joining this slow historical journey. Now, let the story drift away and rest peacefully.